Hey everyone, thank you for joining this special episode of The Green Life. My guest today is Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, who is an award-winning gastroenterologist and the New York Times best-selling author of Fibre Fuelled. Dr. B is back on that list now with his new book, the Fibre Fuelled Cookbook. He's a graduate of Georgetown University School of Medicine and was Chief Medical Resident at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, as well as Chief Gastroenterologist Fellow at the University of North Carolina Hospitals. He has a lot of knowledge, and that shows because his books are amazing at giving information, but also practical guides to getting healthier with our gut using plants. Imagine that. So without further ado, let's dive into this amazing conversation. Welcome, Dr. B. Hello, Dr. B. Thank you so much for joining me on The Green Life today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My pleasure. I'm very excited too. The gut health subject is huge, and I think it needs a little bit of clarity from what I understand, and nobody can explain it better than you. So before we get into your work, can I just have a little introduction about how you got into this? Why did you actually choose to become a gastroenterologist, and how did you choose to even become an author from your practice? Because you also have a busy practice at the hospital, right?
Yeah, I did. This was an unexpected journey in many ways. So I did want to become a gastroenterologist quite early in my medical career. So I was in my third year of medical school, and in the U.S., during your third year, we do 4 years of medical school after college. During your third year of medical school, you rotate through the hospital and you do some obstetrics and some pediatrics and surgery. And I fell in love with gastroenterology, and I made my decision then that this is what I wanted to do. And that was probably 2004. And it took me 10 years to finish that goal. And during those 10 years, I actually had a health crisis. This was around 2012 or so, but it actually went on for several years. But I had a health crisis, and I was more than 20 kilos overweight, and high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high anxiety. My professional life was going extremely well, way beyond what I thought it would. But I had extremely low self-esteem, and I was not happy. And so I was just in a very dark place, to be totally honest. And I think that was the result of me prioritizing my career so much that I was forced to make compromises in terms of my personal life, like, for example, my diet and lifestyle. And I was choosing convenience, things that were inexpensive, things that were quick, things that, they tasted good. And they're not good for you, but heck, if it tastes good and it's cheap and it's quick, then this is what I need right now. And the problem is then all of a sudden it's like you discover that this is catching up to you. Mm. And I didn't know how to fix this problem. I was a very well-trained gastroenterologist, trained at some of the best American institutions, Georgetown, Northwestern, the University of North Carolina. But the pills and the procedures in my doctor's bag were not going to fix these issues for me. And ultimately it was discovering nutrition and changing my diet that allowed me to emerge from this, sort of cave that I was in and come out, sort of shining and glowing in a new man and feeling like myself again and feeling very confident and energized. And when that happened, to be honest with you, I feel like that was a moment in my life where there was just no turning back. Because I had discovered something that was not taught to me as a part of my medical education. But if it's this powerful in my life, how could I possibly deny that to my patients who need, solutions to their problems? And so I started voraciously studying and consuming nutritional research. And I started bringing it into my clinic, and I would work with my patients. We would work as a team, and we were trying to figure these things out together. And I started witnessing them having amazing transformations. And this all started to snowball to where by 2016, I felt like there's this story that is taking place behind closed doors in a very private one-on-one setting that I'm not allowed to like talk about individual patients publicly. But there's this story that's happening that I feel that like literally everyone deserves to hear this. You shouldn't have to be one of the few people that are able to see me in my clinic. Like it needs to be more broad than this. So I did something that felt very uncomfortable for me, which is that I started a social media account. And that was 2016. And frankly, no one really cared for a very long time. But I stuck with it and I kept kind of sharing this story. And then in 2018, there was a breakthrough. I went on a podcast with someone who now has become a very close friend of mine, but at the time we didn't really know each other. His name is Simon Hill. And the show was called Plant Proof at the time. Now it's called The Proof. And so anyway, that went viral. And literally hundreds of thousands of people listened to this podcast episode. And so when this happened, I felt like, wow, there's something here. There's energy here. So I wanted to share it even more in a structured way. And that led me to pursuing a book. So my book, Fibre Fuelled, I wrote at 5 a.m. There it is. I managed, by the way, to choose a title where both words are different in the UK than they are in the US.
I know. I got the European one, yeah.
Yeah. So nonetheless, I spent 2019 writing this book at 5 a.m. I was the most disciplined I've ever been in my life, going to bed at 8:30 at night, waking up at 5. And it was a passion project and I didn't know what was going to happen. It came out during the pandemic in May of 2020 and it became a New York Times bestseller and it has sold over 200,000 copies.
Amazing.
And now here we are in my second book, which is like, we're calling it a cookbook, but it's kind great. Of not. There it is.
Yeah, I got both.
So yeah, my second book came out just a little over 3 weeks ago. And it has been 2 weeks on the New York Times bestselling list so far. And I'm going to find out later today whether or not there's a third week that it's on the list. So it's been doing extremely well.
Well, fingers crossed, because it's a great book. And I feel like it's a great summary of the first one with the practical things to do. So it's brilliant because people need that. You know, a lot of times we read theory, but then the action part is harder. That's one, like, you know, as a coach, I work with doctors, and it's great because the doctors can give, the integrative doctors that I work with can give the solutions, but then the follow through is a little harder to do. So that's when I come in and we look at nutrition and we look at lifestyle, and it's brilliant because it's the way that I personally healed myself from my own problems. And the gut, you know, is something that I'm really passionate about because thanks to my parents who didn't know better when I was a kid and gave me a lot of antibiotics, I spent about 20 years being super constipated and having IBS and having a very terrible, 20s into my 30s. And I only really fixed my gut at 33. So it's been 7 years that I don't have, almost 8 years that I don't have severe IBS anymore. But it really was going plant-based that did it for me. And when I did go plant-based, I didn't really understand that connection because the doctors that I was seeing were not really aware of nutrition. And I didn't want to take drugs. I was at least, very quite holistic in my approach. And I didn't want to just take pills. I'm like, no, I need to find out why this is happening. I don't want to just mask the problem. Plus, that you really can't do anything with IBS. You can't take a pill for IBS. So it was really this journey into gut health. And it was listening to Donna Gates that kind of started me off into looking at the gut. Otherwise, I never even thought that we had all this microbiome. And that segues me into the next question. If you had to explain to people what the microbiome is, what would you say?
Well, it's quite fascinating to consider the possibility that we as humans are not solitary creatures. We may view ourselves that way. We may look in the mirror and just see one person, but that's partially because there is life that is invisible to the naked eye that is completely carpeting us, our entire body. From the top of our head to the tip of our toes, we have invisible microbes. If you were to like literally look at your thumb, right there on your thumb, there's as many microbes as there are people in the UK. That's how covered in microbes we actually are. And they're most concentrated. So we have them, on our skin, in our mouth, in our nose. Like, believe it or not, there's an eyeball microbiome. But the most concentrated place that you'll find them is actually inside of our gut, specifically inside of our large intestine, the colon. And in that location, there are 38 trillion microbes, which is an absurdly large number and very hard to put into context. But here I will try to do my best. If we look up to the sky and observe all of the stars that exist within our galaxy, there's about 100 billion stars within our galaxy. So if we take that and we condense it down to the size of a ball, we would have to place 380 galaxies full of stars into our colon for every single one of us. Wow. To equal the number of microbes that we have inside of us. And these microbes, they have been there with humans since day one. There was never a moment in time where microbes and humans were separate. We were always together. When we talk about evolution, human evolution through the years, how we changed. Well, that's not just a human story. That's humans and microbes co-evolving. And through that co-evolution that took place, we grew to really trust them. And it's just so clear to me as a medical doctor how much we grew to trust them, because we actually put them in a position where we rely on them. And without them, we cannot be healthy humans. And I'm completely convinced that this is true. So, like, where do they, what is their role? Well, they are intimately involved in our digestion, our immune system, our metabolism, our hormonal balance, our mood, our brain health, and our energy levels. They also, in many ways, are involved in the regulation of our genetic code and how our genes are expressed. They also represent 99.5% of the genetic code that we carry. So if you were asking, like, where do your genes come from? Believe it or not, less than 1% of your genes are human genes, and more than 99% of your genes come from these microbes. So they're a very relevant, very important part of what makes us healthy humans. And it's just quite fascinating to consider the possibility that maybe the most important part of human health isn't even human.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. It is a concept that we never think about. And I guess, if you look at history, Hippocrates knew something was going on with our gut and microbiome. He probably didn't know about the microbiome at that extent, but we knew our gut would, mean health or disease. And it took us like thousands of years to actually start talking about it in a way that makes sense and have the science to back us up. So that's such a great and powerful time right now to be it. And I'm sure as we continue to grow, because between 2013 and now, when I found out about it, I never heard of the brain, gut-brain axis at the time. And then all of a sudden, everybody was talking about it, and it was papers everywhere, and it was research. And now it's moving on to other things. And more and more, even with COVID, right? Your book coming out at that time, I think it was not really, it was the perfect time to come out, because they were doing a lot of research about the connection between COVID-19 and the microbiome. And I interviewed Dr. Sabine Hazen, who was one of the leading scientists researching, finding out that the people that were most affected by the COVID-19 virus had no bifidobacteria in their gut, and how that really affected them. And the people that did have a good gut bacteria did much better. And she even did trials, which she's still going on doing fecal transplant to bring the bifidobacteria in people that don't have it to try and make the immune system work better. So it's such a fascinating intertwining of collaborations in our body between all these mechanisms, as you mentioned, our hormones and everything. So it's really, we feel small when we think about that kind of level of importance of our bacteria. So thank you for breaking down what the microbiome is. I think a lot of people really don't understand the magnitude of it, and it's huge. So but I have a question now that you mentioned genetics with the microbiome. Do you believe that our diet, it's ancestral as well? So I heard a lot of people that talk about our ancestral diet. So if you are Mediterranean in a certain way, if you're Polish in certain foods, I do not know if that 100% covers it, because obviously some people would eat less fiber than others, and that doesn't necessarily mean that, that necessarily means no, that is not really great, but they might do better with some foods than others. What's your take on that?
I think the ancestral comment. So to the average person who is not a scientist, their life and their interpretation of events during their life, it really is about narratives, about stories, about emotion, right? And like, it's easy to take a story or a narrative and make it click in a way where in your brain, you're like, this makes sense. Like, even to me, it's like, this makes sense. And the problem is that doesn't always actually turn out to be the way that things work. This is why we have to do science. There are far too many examples, that we could run through all day long, where the intuitive thing, the thing that we thought all made sense, even like, medical doctors and the way that we think that the body works. Once we do the study, we actually discover sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes that's not the way it works. And so the problem with the ancestral approach, there's a couple things. First of all, what I see time and time and time again is that people, they start with the idea of, okay, we need to eat ancestral. Okay, that's interesting. But what is ancestral? And they provide some interpretation of that. And that interpretation is based upon some community that has literally nothing to do with them and the way that they live in 2022.
Yeah.
Right. And perhaps you described the Hadza. And the Hadza are a hunter and gatherer tribe that exists in Africa. And unfortunately, their tribe numbers are diminishing because many of them are leaving the traditional life and entering into normal society. But if you look at the Hadza, okay, these are people that live in Tanzania. They are hunters and gatherers. They don't have a house. They don't have cars. They don't have a refrigerator. Right? You're not living that life. And second of all, this is one population, and we could shift over to a different population and find a completely different pattern, right? So how do we define what ancestral means? We have to understand, first of all, that the origins of humanity, based upon the way that we understand them, is that we originated in Africa and then we radiated out. And part of the reason why, to be completely honest with you, Chantal, about why we outsourced our digestion to these gut microbes, like why didn't we just take it on ourselves as humans and just, we digest our own food? Why would we allow the microbes to do that for us? Well, we're not adaptable, and they are, and they will adapt very quickly. And if you take humans and you radiate them out across the globe, you end up discovering that humans are in a lot of different unique ecosystems, a lot of different and unique environments. They could be up in Sweden. They could be down in Southern Africa. They could be in a rainforest. They could be in a desert. There's so many different environments where you would potentially be placing humans, and they need a gut that's adaptable to that. But with that in mind, what is an ancestral diet? Like you're cherry picking. Inherently, if you define what you think an ancestral diet is, you are inherently cherry picking because you're choosing the victor of who you think defines an ancestral human diet, when in fact humans had varied diets across the entire globe.
Yeah.
And our gut microbiome allows us to have a varied diet. And the further issue here is that you have to understand that people, like evolution, does not care whether or not you live to 100 years old. I mean, it's just the truth. Evolution does not care whether or not you're healthy at 80 years old. Okay. Evolution is driven by basically like, are you fit and strong to create children?
Mm-hmm.
And if you create children, then your gene pool gets carried forward. And the people or animals that are not fit and strong enough to create children, their gene pool is deceased. It's gone. So once you create those children, you've passed on your genetic code. You've fulfilled your expectations in terms of evolution. And anything after that, it doesn't matter, right? There is no selection for longevity. There is no selection for who's going to live to 100. So if you want that, you have to actually engineer it. You have to make the decision that I want to figure out how to live the longest, healthiest life possible. Now, you could approach that by saying, well, I'll eat ancestral. But what does ancestral have to do with longevity? There's no evidence that that isn't a longevity diet. There is no evidence that this is a disease-reducing diet. On the flip side, there's a couple of other ways that you could approach this. You could be super scientific about it and say, okay, like in, for example, population-based studies, what are the longevity foods? Well, hint, hint, it turns out to be things like legumes and whole grains, which, by the way, are microbiome foods. It's not a coincidence that these are the longevity foods. These are the microbiome foods. They're the best microbiome foods. All right. So you could look at it that way and be super academic and scientific about it, but you could also be Dan Buettner. And Dan Buettner is a world explorer who works for National Geographic, who discovered the 5 blue zones. And it's quite simple. Who are the healthiest populations of people and how do they live? Now, that is science. It's its own form of science. It's a little bit different than, for example, an epidemiology study, but it's still an observation. It's still an approach that you can take. But to me, these approaches, whether it be population-based research, epidemiology, or whether it be asking a simple question like, who are the longest lived people and how do they live? These approaches make a lot more sense than saying, what is the diet that a caveman ate 3 million years ago when they were living a completely different life than the way that I'm living in 2022?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even with the blue zone, the common denominator is high fiber, lots of plants, mostly plants.
Mostly plants, 90% or more plants, tons. Like if you ask Dan has become a friend of mine. What's the number one blue zone food? He's going to tell you it's legumes. Go to all 5 blue zones. They have their own version of which legume they're eating. It might be black beans in Costa Rica. It might be something that's more Mediterranean, like fava beans, or something that variety in Sardinia and Icaria. And it's going to be edamame and tofu in Japan. So they all have their own bean.
Yeah. So actually, this is a great way to get into the next question about beans. So we know they're very important. I personally love them. And I'm so glad that when I started healing IBS, I really didn't have any issues with breaking down fiber from the beans. And I guess I'm quite resilient as well. I'm like, okay, fine. Even if it gives me a little bit of bloating, I'm gonna get there. I just adjusted how much I was eating. But a lot of people are really turned off by eating things like beans because they said, oh, well, I get bloated, gassy, and I just don't feel great. And I mean, you explain it really well in the book. Our gut is a muscle that we have to exercise. But if you can go deeper into that. So when we talk about reacting to certain carbohydrates and how even doing the FODMAP diet can get us to a certain point, because that's another thing that comes up all the time. People do the FODMAP diet as if it's something you should stay on for the rest of your life, which is really not sustainable. So if you can just get into that chapter of your book and how you actually get people to slowly get to a point where they can actually really eat those beans and be fine with it.
Our body is designed for adaptation. This goes far beyond the gut. If you want to become better at math problems, you practice math problems. That's your brain. Your brain is adaptable. If you want to be better at running, you should start training and start running. You will become better at running. But if you want to be better at lifting weights, you should lift weights. Don't try running to become better at lifting weights. That doesn't make sense, right?
Mm.
So our body is completely adaptable. Well, guess what the most adaptable part of our entire body is? It's our gut. These microbes that are required for digestion, if you change your diet today, you will start to see changes to your gut microbiome by tomorrow. That's how quickly they are evolving and adapting. And your gut is really currently designed and adapted to whatever the heck you've been eating for the last 3 months. So if you are avoiding beans, you should expect that your gut is not designed to consume beans. But that doesn't mean that it's rigidly locked in. It's not. Again, it's adaptable. You can change it. You can make it whatever you want it to be. You can shape it like a piece of clay. And if you introduce beans and you do it in a systematic way, you can increase your gut's ability to process and digest beans in the same way that a person can train their body to run a marathon. You build up to the marathon. You don't just run a marathon, you build up to the marathon. You train your body. You progressively challenge, and by progressively challenging over time, you're able to do amazing things. Your gut is capable of doing amazing things. You just have to properly challenge it with these foods that perhaps you've been avoiding. Now, with legumes and with whole grains, part of the problem with these foods and why people struggle with them so much is because they are so intensely prebiotic. Prebiotic means food for the microbiome. Fiber is the classic prebiotic. We as humans are not capable. We cannot process fiber. If we did not have microbes, the fiber would just come out the other end.
Mm.
But because we have a microbiome, they have the capacity to break down and digest fiber. And they do it for us. We are leaning on them, though. We are leaning on them 100% when we consume these high prebiotic foods that include legumes and whole grains. And so we actually need them to be up to the task. The problem is, like, a person who has irritable bowel syndrome, like when you don't have digestive health issues, you consume these foods and you're not complaining about it, right? Because it's not the food, it's the gut. The gut is the problem. But when a person has irritable bowel syndrome, or perhaps, ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, or a number of different gut-related digestive health problems, these microbes, they're not in a good place. That's the reason why you have the digestive health problem in the first place. You have a damaged gut. And a damaged gut is like having injured legs and trying to run, right? You have to heal. So now the issue, though, is that healing is not accomplished by avoidance. Avoidance is like saying, hey, I hurt my knee, and so I'm just going to lay on the couch and never move. Well, that may improve the pain in your knee temporarily, but the knee doesn't actually get stronger.
Mm.
And your body starts to deteriorate because you made this choice to stop moving. Alternatively, if you have an injured knee, you can go through a rehabilitation process where you're not like literally just kind of going gung-ho and running and doing whatever the heck you want, because that would be silly. But instead, what you're doing is you're systematically, slowly challenging your knee. And every time you challenge it, it gets a little stronger. And as you repeat these challenges and escalate them, that strength of the knee starts to evolve in parallel until you reach a certain point where now the limitations are actually gone. The training wheels come off the bike. And the knee, you have no pain, but you also have fully restored function.
Mm.
So now you can get back to playing tennis or basketball or whatever sport you really enjoy, right? You're not limited anymore. When it comes to the gut, if you avoid the food, that's not rehabilitation, that's avoidance. Your gut gets weaker.
Yeah.
But if you systematically, slowly reintroduce these foods, and I'm not kidding when I say that, like, if your problem is legumes, let's start with 1 chickpea. Let's start there. 1 chickpea, and then we'll go to 2.
Yeah.
And then 4, right? But if you do this, you are challenging your gut. You are reintroducing your food. Your gut adapts to what you are challenging with. it becomes more functional, more capable. And over the course of time, you actually get yourself to a point where now you can tolerate this food without restriction. And you actually start to enjoy it. And you love it. And it nourishes your body. And it nourishes your gut microbes. And you have just proven, people always want to know, how do I know? How do I know if I've healed my gut? This is it. This is the answer. If you can't tolerate foods, and then we go through a process where you can tolerate those foods, you've healed your gut. You win.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are the foods that are most common for people that have digestive issues to initially have to really be careful with when they introduce them? And let's say a patient's come to see you and they really are a mess with their gut. What would you do to start them off? So, let's give it like a sample, brackets protocol, or how you approach this, so that if anybody is facing this that are listening, perhaps can start really thinking about it and buy your book, but think about how to do this.
So Chantal, in the new book, the Fibre Fuelled Cookbook, it's really the how of gut health. The first book was why. The first book was, okay, this is a passion project. Let me show you why this is so important, why this is changing the game, and why fiber really needs to be, at the forefront of your nutritional approach. This book is the how. Let's make it happen. Let's bring this to life. Let's make this possible. And in the book, I bring forward a strategy called the growth strategy, GROWTH. Now, this is an acronym, growth. Every single letter in this word is a step in the process to healing. And the very first letter, the reason why I bring it up is because we have to go through the process literally the way that I describe it in the book, because this is the way that I would approach it with a person who's in my clinic. The first step, G, stands for Genesis. This means Genesis, like what is the root cause of your issue? We have to start there because everyone wants to get to what's the plan? Well, the plan can only be as accurate as your understanding of the problem. So it really warrants the patience to first stop and pause and make sure that you're taking the time and investing into understanding what the issue is. And in the book, I talk about the big three of food sensitivity. These are the three diagnoses that, as a gastroenterologist, I do not want to miss. Because if they are there, so many times in my career, I have seen people who come in and they go, "Doc, I'm bloated, I'm miserable, I'm suffering." And if you discover one of these three things and you fix it, their issues go away completely. So the big three are constipation, celiac disease, and gallbladder dysfunction. And the reason why these are so important is like there is epidemic constipation out there, like epidemic.
Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned, Chantal, a moment ago that you suffered with 20 years of constipation. All right. Did you have a lot of gas and bloating?
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised I'm alive.
Yes. So now, did you have days where your belly got distended almost like you were pregnant, but you were not?
So this happens especially with the IBS, because obviously with IBS you get the bouts of constipation and then it gets to the other side. Every 3 o'clock, every 3 p.m. I was at work. I was working in banking at the time. Every single 3 p.m. I looked like I was 6 months pregnant. Every single day.
Right. So, and this is a classic story. Okay. Now, some of the other symptoms that people may experience with with constipation could be abdominal pain, cramps. That can be in many different locations around the belly button, upper abdomen, lower abdomen. Many people actually get nausea. They lose their appetite. Tons of fatigue. And it's an underrated thing because doctors don't know what to make of fatigue, but constipation is a major driver of fatigue. But the number one symptom in constipation is gas and bloating. Everyone who's constipated has gas and bloating.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that you flip to the other side. Okay. Let me unpack that just for a quick moment, because it's a bit of an interesting and complex thing. It can be very confusing to the layperson, and frankly, it's confusing to a lot of doctors unless you really have a ton of experience treating constipation like I do. So a person who's constipated, there's two patterns that may emerge that will confuse the heck out of people. And they actually go to their doctor and they say, I have diarrhea. Okay. The first pattern is where what happens is you back up, back up, back up, explode.
Yeah.
So you have a couple of days where you're not pooping, and then you have a day where you're flushing out.
Mm.
And it's like a slingshot. A slingshot has no power until you start pulling it back. But the further that you pull it back, the more power that you have put into that device. That's what your colon is like when you are backing up. You are backing up, backing up, backing up until you get to this day where your body is just like, I need to get it out, all of it, get it all out. And so the first bowel movement will be formed, and then subsequent bowel movements will become looser and looser and looser. And you'll go all day. And it's a miserable day because if you're a banker or you're a professional person or whatever job, frankly, you work, honestly, whatever job you work, it's like you have to run to the bathroom because you have these urgent bowel movements, right? So the problem is that that particular day is the day that you are miserable the most. And so your interpretation is that this is diarrhea, but this is not diarrhea. This is actually constipation.
Mm.
Because if you were to actually get into a rhythm by pooping every day, if you did not back up, you would not have diarrhea. So the solution, paradoxically, is actually to make that person poop. But unfortunately, what ends up happening many times is they get treated for diarrhea, and that actually makes the problem worse. The second example where diarrhea can come in is called overflow diarrhea. And this is the person who has been constipated their whole life. Like it could be you, Chantal, and I don't know that this happened to you. You're not my patient. I'm just kind of sharing the story and using you as an example of how this may work. I hope you don't mind. But so a person's constipated for 20 years. And then all of a sudden they come into the office and they go, Dr. B, I don't know what happened, but I'm having explosive urgent diarrhea every day. Like not back up, explode, but no, instead this is literally diarrhea every bowel movement. It's just liquid or mush and it's urgent.
Mm.
Okay. This person is still having a lot of gas and bloating. Gas and bloating is one of the hallmark signs of constipation. Well, what happens here is that the solid stuff has actually become stuck.
Mm.
And then the liquid sneaks through
it.
the cracks in the crevices and it comes down to the bottom. And anytime liquid gets to your rectum, there's urgency because the body is not designed to keep liquid inside. So the body says, get it out, get it out, get it out. So you have to rush to the restroom. So the problem here is that we have what's called overflow diarrhea. It's actually severe constipation. And again, many people will take anti-diarrhea medicines.
Make it worse.
And make it worse. The solution is paradoxical. You got to flush it out. So you flush out the colon. And what you discover is that when you flush out, you actually wake up and you're back to being constipated again.
Mm.
Right? Because you broke up this sort of, for lack of a better term, it's a logjam. So anyway, here's my point though, Chantal. If I take you and you're suffering with constipation, you are before me, and you're saying to me, Dr. B, what do I eat? I would say to you, Chantal, before we go to food, we have to get you pooping. We have to fix your constipation, because if I fix your constipation, you are going to find that your food intolerances, they go away.
Yeah. So
that's why I have to start off with that. By the way, for people who are interested, I do talk a little bit about constipation in the new book. I do talk about it. But if you really want like a truly targeted deep dive, I don't talk about it in such extreme detail because this is a book for a lot of people, not just people with constipation. So I have a constipation course that people can check out if they're interested. You can come to my website and check that out.
Amazing.
Anyway, so once we get past that though, once we understand what the root of our problem is, let's pretend that's irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, cool. Part of healing irritable bowel syndrome is restoring the gut. And we do that with food, but we need a process to do that. And so what I teach through the growth strategy is restrict, observe, work it back in. These are the 3 steps that you would follow in order to basically identify what your food intolerances are. You asked me, what are common food intolerances? So in the book, there are 2 main protocols. and they're completely recipe-based protocols. This is one of the things that I was excited to do, and it's a little bit unique, is that I knew I was doing recipes for this book. And I knew that if I wanted to help people with their food intolerances, I needed a lot of recipes, a lot. So we were able to bring these common goals together, where I can give a recipe book that also is designed for healing. And so the two main types of food intolerances, the first are FODMAPs. FODMAP is an acronym. I'll spare you the details. You can look it up. I could say it, but it's so nerdy and boring. But basically, it is the fermentable parts of our food. And this includes lactose and dairy. This includes fructans that you will find in whole grains or in garlic and onions. This includes things that you will find in legumes. And it also includes artificial sweeteners and sugar alcohols and fructose that you will find in fruit. Okay. These things are not meant to be vilified. Like, we shouldn't make them sound like they're bad. They're not bad. Actually, they're prebiotic. They're good. This is the food that your gut microbiome is starving for. But what we come back to is, when it's prebiotic, yes, it is the food that is best for your gut, but it is also the food that challenges your gut the most, because your body cannot process it. So you need your gut microbes to do it for you. And if they're not in a good place, they struggle. So in the FODMAP chapter, we help to basically identify whether or not you have a FODMAP intolerance. And then we work through a process of reintroduction. You always want to reintroduce. Permanent elimination is a horrible idea, except when you really need to for medical reasons, such as you have celiac disease. So, and then the second food intolerance is, I'm just going to tell you, I am like already blown away. The book's only been out for 3 weeks, and I can't believe how many people are sending me messages of healing around this chapter in the book. It's histamine intolerance.
Which, by the way, I've never seen anybody write about.
So histamine intolerance is a sincere challenge for conventional healthcare. And it has a lot to do with what we know and the way that healthcare works. And these things don't work together. They're like oil and water, right? They're separate. And so it's a true struggle. So here's the problem. For histamine intolerance, there's no blood test. There's no poop test. There's no CAT scan. And when you don't have a test that's readily available and accessible to doctors, then they don't know how to diagnose it.
Can I ask you then, what about the IgE and IgG tests? Are they inaccurate?
So those tests are not accurate. I actually find that people get more confusion than value out of doing them. Because really what it comes down to, again, with restrict, observe, work it back in, is that if you have a food intolerance, your symptoms should improve when you reduce it, and your symptoms should come back when you work it back in, right? That's evidence of a food intolerance. So the problem is, if you check a blood test and you have no symptoms, the blood test is telling you you have a problem. You don't. If you have no symptoms, you don't have that problem. So it's important for people to understand that we are not in a state yet where this type of testing, aside from a few limited things that I talk about in the book, we're really not in a state where this type of testing is going to be able to get the job done. So, but with histamine intolerance, there is a test. It's just, again, very challenging to conventional healthcare. The test is that you go onto a low histamine diet. But it's not easy to just define the food. I'm going to do that. But it's not easy to just define the food. You actually need recipes. And that's what the new book gives you. It gives you 26 low histamine recipes, and you eat this way. And then you see how you feel. And again, I'm being shocked by how many people are messaging me every day being like, this is changing my life. So who has histamine intolerance? Who needs to do this protocol? All right. So I'm going to list a whole bunch of symptoms. And for the listeners at home, your job is very simple. Ask yourself the question, do you have 2 of these symptoms? And if the answer is yes, then you should try this protocol. Gas, bloating, other digestive symptoms, nausea, cramping, abdominal discomfort, diarrhea, constipation, acid reflux. Going up top and working my way down because histamine intolerance can affect the entire body. Headaches, migraines, runny nose, sinus issues, chronic sinusitis, sore throat, dry cough, funny heartbeats, rapid heartbeat, palpitations, lightheadedness, insomnia, fatigue, painful menstrual cycles. Okay. So if you have at least 2 of those symptoms, that doesn't mean that you have histamine intolerance. It just means that you could have histamine intolerance. And following this protocol will allow you to answer that question. And you just eat this way. Now, what are high histamine foods? The classics are fermented foods. And that includes vinegar, chocolate, alcohol. It includes fermented dairy products like cheese. Fish and shellfish are very high in histamine. And then in the plant-based world, spinach, tomatoes, eggplants, and avocados are also potentially high histamine.
Man, I can't live without avocados.
I'm sorry. So anyway, now it sounds like, oh, wow, like, I don't want to eliminate these foods. Well, I don't want you to eliminate these foods, actually, not at all. What I want to first empower you with a diagnosis, empower you with the information of knowing that this is something that's affecting your body. And then once you know that, let's move into healing and work towards healing your gut, because you can actually reintroduce these foods, and there's a systematic way to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Slowly reintroducing so that the immune system doesn't react to them. What is your thought? Well, I think I know already your answer, but I'm going to ask because it's a big, you write about fad diets, which is really good to know about, because everybody wants to find a solution. Everybody's looking to get healthier, and that's great. But sometimes we get caught up in these trends. And one trend that I saw, especially in 2016, was the bone broth trend. Everybody was talking about it, and then at some point in the health stores in London, they were selling it in the refrigerator so that people didn't have to make it at home. What's your take on that? Because what does that mean to add, because obviously the thought was there's a lot of collagen, and collagen will help heal the gut. What's your take on that? On that approach? Is it a fad diet?
So here's the thing. First of all, when it comes to the choices that we make in terms of empowering our gut, we're not in a position where we lack information. There are plenty of things that we can do that are being described in my books that are simple choices that are actually proven by evidence to support a healthier gut microbiome. So we have to enter into the conversation. It's not like we're shooting in the dark here. Like, we have great choices already on the table. And then you come to bone broth. What's the evidence? There's not a single study to demonstrate benefit of bone broth for gut health. There is no study. Now, there is a study that shows that when you boil the bone, because you're cooking it at high heat, you actually are creating an environment that allows the toxic heavy metals that have accumulated in the bone of the cow to actually leach into the broth. So you are actually creating a toxic broth. Now, the question comes back to the bone. Does the bone have value? Because in my books, first of all, let me say, I love a delicious broth. I love it. I get why people like it. It's nourishing, tastes great, it's gentle on the gut. Okay. Can we create a broth that actually is good for gut health? Absolutely. What are the prebiotics? The prebiotics are the ones that are food for the microbiome. Fiber is a prebiotic. Polyphenols are prebiotics. How do we get those? Well, we create a vegetable broth. That's what my biome broth is. My biome broth started in Fibre Fuelled, but now in the new book, I have 7 versions because people freaked out so much that I was like, not only am I bringing it back, I'm bringing it back times 7. Okay. But the bone, does it have value? The collagen that comes from the bone, does it have value? Well, There is no study to show that it has value. And even collagen supplements, concentrated forms of collagen, which research says that by 2027, this is going to be more than a $7 billion per year industry. They are getting rich.
Yeah.
But what is the evidence? What is the evidence for gut health? There is none. There's not a single study to indicate that collagen actually is beneficial to human gut health.
It's interesting with so much funding, considering that it's at coming to 7 billion industry. You'd think they have the money to have studies to support their benefits. So that's fishy.
They clearly have the money. There is no question that they have the money.
Yeah.
Now, here's how this plays out. Let's pretend that I'm the CEO, okay, of a collagen supplement company. There's basically two potential strategies that I could take. Here's the first. You guys are already paying me. I'm marketing nonsense. Like, I'm marketing something that doesn't actually have science to back it up. But because my marketing is working and you're paying me, why would I change? Right? If my job is to make money, I am making money. And so I'm accomplishing my goal. The second play is, okay, I could do a study. And doing the study would silence the critics like Dr. B. And it would prove that collagen works. But what if the study doesn't show a benefit? Am I going to publish it? Heck no. And so here we are. There is no evidence to prove that collagen works.
Yeah. Well, what's your take on probiotics supplements then?
Well, with probiotics, I see it as a different thing. There's a challenge with probiotics. People are commonly treating them as if they're a pharmaceutical. And I don't really believe that that's a fair comparison, because although there is some rare cases of adverse effects from probiotics, literally millions of people are taking probiotics on a daily basis across the United States alone. And there's very, very few cases of like serious adverse reactions. I mean, I can just say this as a gastroenterologist. So it'd be hyperbolic to claim that they're causing like a ton of harm. They are harming people's wallets in some cases. The issue with probiotics is that there's no one size fits all. We have a very unique gut microbiome. We are completely bio-individual in terms of our gut microbes. When we send a probiotic in, you don't know how your body is going to react to it. You may get a great benefit, you may get no benefit, and you may also have an adverse effect. And what I find is that the majority of the time people get no benefit, or in some cases, they do get a benefit. So the key from my perspective is having a systematic way to approach this. If you try a probiotic and you find that you are feeling better because of that probiotic and you are comfortable with the price, then I think it makes complete sense because it's working for your unique biology. On the flip side, if you try a probiotic and you get it for a month and it does nothing for you, stop spending money immediately.
Yeah. I must say, full transparency, I do take probiotics, and I only really found one brand that I personally like. They are from the UK. They're called Optibac. The reason I like them is because they just really focus on that. They don't do vitamins. They don't do anything but probiotics. And they have a ton of science on their website. But I do agree that you need to try what works for you, because had I taken it and I didn't feel anything different, then I wouldn't really carry on. But also, I'm still feeding my microbiome with the right prebiotics. So I'm still eating a lot of fiber. I'm still eating plants only. I'm giving it what it needs. So whether it's the probiotic per se that is doing the job, or it's actually the food I'm putting in, and I think when I started with them, when I started healing from IBS, they really made a huge difference at the time. And I just never stopped. I carried on, but I'm quite sure that now, if I didn't have them, if I didn't have my probiotics, I'd be fine, because I think I've restructured my gut in a way that I have more variety in my in the population of my colon. So actually, my next question is, how do we make sure that we have a good variety of probiotics in our gut? What's the best way?
I think the best way, based upon the American Gut Project, which is the largest study to date that allows us to make connections between our diet and lifestyle choices and the variety or diversity within our gut microbiome. In that study, the most powerful predictor of a healthy gut was the diversity of plants in your diet. And specifically, people who consumed 30 or more plants per week had the healthiest guts. The reason that this happens is that these microbes, they have different dietary preferences. So it's not like fiber, we think of this generic thing, we just need a certain number of grams of fiber. That is not true. Fiber is unique, it is diverse. Every plant has fiber, and every plant has its own unique types of fiber. And those unique types of fiber will feed unique families of microbes. So certain microbes like kale, but different microbes like black beans.
Yeah.
And so when you eat a variety of plants, you are providing the prebiotics, the fiber, the resistant starches, the polyphenols, the different families of microbes that they like. And so therefore you are supporting a diverse mix of microbes. So diversity on your plate can translate into diversity within your gut microbiome.
No, that's fantastic. I love it. And for the travelers out there, because I know a lot of people that are always traveling, and we always worry if we go to a new place, our gut can act up, can react to the new food maybe, or just the environment. What's the best way for someone to travel and not have digestive issues on their journeys?
I think you need to have a plan. I think, part of the issue is we identify that there's a problem, but we don't create solutions for that problem. So, now that you know that there's an issue there, how can we adjust or adapt? And some people get diarrhea and some people get constipation. And so having some sort of mechanism that works for that specific scenario is what you want. So like if a person is constipated, then I might have them take a prebiotic fiber supplement and a magnesium supplement and they may not need that on a regular basis, but when they're traveling, they may need that. And if a person has diarrhea, actually the prebiotic fiber supplements are great for diarrhea too. That's the beauty of prebiotic fiber supplements. They work for both. So I would look at things like that. I would also look at making sure that you are not completely upending your diet. Because again, the reason why this happens is that you are so adapted to a certain way of life, not just your diet, but it does include your diet, but it also includes your lifestyle. And then all of a sudden you upend that and you situate yourself in a new place, new diet, new approach, and your body rejects this because it's not adapted to it. So how can we kind of get back to what's normal? Well, I think snacking is an opportunity to maintain normal. So for example, pieces of fruit, like making sure that you populate wherever you are. You could be in a hotel room, run out to the supermarket and bring back some fruit. Have it in the hotel room. And this is a snack that you could have between meals, or perhaps it becomes your breakfast, but just like looking for ways to get in normal fiber-rich foods that aren't necessarily cooked by a chef.
Yeah, keep them raw. Is raw a good way for the microbiome?
I think that raw is good for the microbiome. Raw is also the most taxing on the microbiome. So for people that have a damaged gut, like people who have irritable bowel syndrome and they're on YouTube and they're like, oh, I'm going raw vegan, it's going to fix my gut issues. No, actually, I'm worried that it's not going to, because you are the person who's most likely to actually have a problem. And then you're going to quit. And then you're going to publish your YouTube video like 4 weeks later where you're like, vegan sucks. Vegan destroyed my health, destroyed my gut. No, you just didn't understand what you were actually doing. And you're flipping your diet all over the place. And your gut was confused and not adapted to it. So I think like easing your body into it is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw this trend, and I think, again, you bring it home that education is the key. Being well informed and educated, and especially in this time and age when we have access to resources. And I do understand that it can be quite confusing because there's a lot of conflict. But again, you want to go where there is common sense, there is research, and where there is proof, right? And this is why I actually really like Simon as well. When you mentioned him, I like his book and I like how he approaches things. But I also see that it's really important for us to understand, the more we eat just let's put it to this esoteric way, like the microbiome is in the ether, is in on plants, in everything. If we have them in our body, then plants, it makes sense that it's the normal food that they would thrive on. And sometimes we just forget that we're so connected to nature that we just try to do things in a very different way. These products, we're full of fiber. Yeah, fiber is important. Okay, yeah, well, you can have fiber in this prepackaged product and you'll be fine. And as you mentioned before, you're not going to be fine because it's not the right type, it's not the right kind, it's not the variety that your body needs. So we have to really be smart about how we approach this and listen to our body more, which is a lot of times I don't see people doing that, which is sad. But I mean, I know we're coming up to the end of the interview and you have a lot to do and you're doing these amazing Instagram lives all the time, which I absolutely love. I'm always listening in when I can. And if you have anything coming up that people should know about, we're going to put everything that relates to your books and your course in the show notes as well, so people can approach them, can look them up, and I think it will help a lot of them. But if you have anything coming up that is really cool and we should know about, please tell us.
I guess the big thing is my book. My new book is out, and I mean I'm super excited about this book. I don't know what else to say other than I'm so excited about this book. I worked really hard on it. It's basically a year of my life. I also had an amazing team. So Alex Caspero, who is a registered dietitian, she's also a recipe developer. People are raving about the recipes. Credit to Alex. Dr. Nina Foster, she's a PhD who also is a fermentation expert. She did the fermentation recipes. And then I have Ashley McLaughlin, who did the food photography, and people just think it's stunning. Yeah. So the book really came together. It was a great team effort. But at the same time, I'm so proud of the contribution that this makes, where it's not just a cookbook, it's a functional tool that can be applied to your life to enhance your health. And if you have digestive health issues, if you have food intolerances, I don't think there's ever been a book that's more designed for that. But if you don't have those issues, I just want to say that I don't think it's a good choice to neglect your gut microbiome when we know that your gut is essential to digestion, your immune system, your metabolism, your hormones, your mood, your brain health, your energy levels. Don't neglect this, because then you wake up one day and you have health issues. Yeah. Instead, recognize that and nurture it. And have a plan that's intentional for that. And that's what this book is about. Every single recipe is designed for gut health. They're not just recipes. They're tools for gut health. So anyway, that's what I'm very excited about. And then I have a course that I run called the Plant-Fed Gut. And it's been a year. It's a 7-week immersive course. It's been a year since I've run it, and it's firing back up in the next few weeks. So for people who are interested, come to my website, theplantfedgut.com. I'd really encourage you to sign up for my email newsletter, because that's where I have a lot of conversations about new research that comes out. And follow me on Instagram and Facebook at The Gut Health MD.
Perfect. We'll put everything in the show notes and we'll make sure everybody knows, and I'll keep on being one of your top fans. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing such great information. We could talk for hours because gut is so vast and there's so much to dive into. We could go into cancer even. I mean, this is such a great, the gut is fantastic. So I really appreciate the work that you do, and you're right. It's a very tangible tool that we need, and you created one. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. B, and thank you everyone for staying on for this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. The conversation could have gone on forever. There's so much to say about gut health. It's brilliant. I really hope that you are now excited about this book and you go out there and get yourself a copy of the Fibre Fuelled Cookbook, as well as following Dr. B on his Instagram, where he's super active, and stay tuned on his website because he has an amazing masterclass coming up. All the information, all the links, and all the details are on our show notes, so please check them out. Meanwhile, if you enjoyed this episode, as always, please share, like, and make sure you comment so we can grow and make this show even better. Have a great day. See you next time.